was born in 1957. An exact date of birth is not known. Now, growing up, it has been said that Jameson was, quote, groomed for greatness. And this is how Jameson grew up. He believed that he was going to be successful. There was no ifs or buts about it. It was destined for him and he didn't have to put in any work. Even in his friendship group, he always had to be the one in charge. He was always bossing the other two around. Jameson wanted to become a lawyer. His grandfather used to take him to trials, like murder trials. So one night, Jameson is hanging out with a few of his friends when all of a sudden this random man ran into the house and started violently stabbing Jameson's friend. Everyone there is in absolute shock. They don't even know what the hell is happening. It happened so quickly. And the friend that is being stabbed is a boy called Ken. He is only 20 years old. The attacker lifted his knife and slit Ken's throat. And then he just ran back out the door. Jameson had witnessed in front of his own eyes his friend be murdered. Now, the attacker was determined to be a 25-year-old man called Randy. And earlier on in that day, Randy and Ken got into a little bit of an argument because Ken was eating a cheese sandwich in the library and Randy asked him to stop and Ken refused to stop eating. They got into a little bit of an argument and that is why Randy killed Ken over a sandwich. It is said that Jameson was never the same after this incident. His personality just completely changed. He became more shut off from the world and he went off grid. He dropped out of college and just disappeared. And after being off grid for so long, he just turns up in his hometown in Philadelphia. And what does he do? He meets up with his friend Bob. Well, Jameson meets up with Bob and he starts telling Bob what he's been doing for those 20 years. But he first said that he spent some time in Israel and he served in the military there. He then met a woman from the Netherlands. He fell in love with her and moved to the Netherlands. He went to university to study Japanese. And now that Jameson was back from the Netherlands, he needed somewhere to stay because he had nowhere to go. So Bob felt really uncomfortable. I mean, this was his best friend, or at least one of his best friends from high school, but he hadn't heard from him in 20 years. He all of a sudden shows up and he's basically asking to stay at his house. So he ended up saying yes, and this would be a decision that he would soon regret because Jameson was an absolute nightmare. Because most of the time, Jameson would just sit around and complain about everything, complain about how his life has turned out. And of course, he blamed everything else other than himself. He started to say that his dad was really abusive towards him and he really hated his mom, and he hated his mom from the age of 8 years old. So he was living with Bob for a short time, but Bob's wife just couldn't take it anymore and she decided to kick Jameson out. So Jameson, with no one else to turn to, he was now just left on the streets. He had nowhere else to go. Jameson is now in his mid-40s and he decides that, you know what, it is now time for me to get my law degree. And he goes to university to get his law degree. He's finally achieved what he has always wanted, but at his first attempt at taking the bar exam, he failed. So because he couldn't practice law, he still decided to use his law degree in very evil ways. And this is when Jameson pretty much becomes a serial squatter. A serial squatter is basically just somebody that moves from one rental place to the next rental place to the next rental place, and they never become a legal tenant. And by doing this, they end up not paying rent. And it's usually the same kind of story in these serial squatter cases. They move in on false pretenses. Sometimes they use a fake name, sometimes they give fake details. They do tend to target very vulnerable people that they can take advantage of, and a lot of the time as well, they do pay the first month's rent to get their foot in the door, and then after that first month they pretty much don't pay anything, and that person will stay in the property for as long as possible before they eventually get evicted. However, Jameson would go one step further because these serial squatters, most of the time their objective is to just get free accommodation. However, Jameson thrived on destroying people's lives. The first victim that we know of was actually a school that he worked for. So for some reason, Jameson was able to get a job as a teacher, and this school that he got a job at was a private school in New York. So Jameson was given this really fancy apartment. However, this job wouldn't last very long because he wasn't a very good teacher. And it wasn't long until he was fired. And this is when he moves on to his next victim. Arlene was currently 43 years old. So Jameson met Arlene in the park, and the two of them pretty much hit it off straight away, and they start dating. She felt bad for him. I mean, she was dating him and now he was homeless. So she told Jameson that he could stay with her whilst he got his feet back on the ground as long as he helped pay bills. So he moves in, and the very next day, Arlene returns home from work, and when she enters her apartment, all of the furniture has been moved. He wanted his victims to feel unsettled. He wanted them to feel paranoid in their own home. He would complain that the windows wouldn't open properly, that the toilet didn't flush properly, that there was dirty dishes on the side, and because of all of this, he was not paying rent. Oh no, she violated his rights. And this weird and bizarre behavior went on for months. She went to the police and she said that this man living with her, Jameson, is driving her insane. She wanted to get permission to change the locks because he's not technically a tenant. Like, that is her apartment. Surely she should be allowed to change the locks if she wanted to. But the police told her that she wasn't allowed to change the locks. Even though Jameson wasn't a legal tenant, he still had the right to live there. Jameson ended up staying with Arlene for the next 4 years. But it gets worse. It really does. After 4 years, Arlene had had enough and she just couldn't control her anger and her rage, and she slapped him, and Jameson lost it. When Arlene slapped him, he just grabbed her throat and started choking her. In response to this, Arlene kicked Jameson as hard as she could, and thankfully she was able to get away, and she ran out of the apartment and dialed 911, and officers came out and they managed to calm down the situation. She was actually scared of Jameson at this point, so she filed for an order of protection against him, and she also filed for his eviction. He was not happy about this, so he filed a fake police report saying that Arlene had attacked him with a knife, and unbelievably, the police believed him. So Arlene ended up being arrested and charged and given 1 year's probation, all from this fake police report. And because of all of this, Arlene was forced to move out of her own apartment. So now Jameson was living in this apartment legally on his own. So now we get to 2012 and Jameson is 55 years old. And you guessed it, he's moving on to his next victim, who is a woman called Sonia. She lived in an apartment in Queens, and following a breakup, she was looking for a new roommate because she was really struggling to pay her mortgage. She put an ad on Craigslist, and who responded to that ad? Jameson. And things moved very quickly. They were supposed to just meet to see if things were going to work out, but Jameson turned up with a U-Haul van, like he was already about to move in, and she let him move in because she felt like she had no other option, because she needed to pay her mortgage, otherwise she was going to lose her home. After the 2 to 3 months, Jameson stopped paying rent. He started just being a little bit more confrontational, a little bit more aggressive, and he was walking around the apartment as if it was his apartment, like he owned it. So Sonia does exactly the same thing as Arlene. She goes to the authorities and says to them, can I change the locks? Can I just one day change the locks and not let this man back in? But again, Sonia was told the exact same thing, that would be against the law, that Jameson has rights. He has squatters' rights. And she can't change the locks because that goes against his rights. And things were just getting worse and worse for Sonia. She wasn't able to make her mortgage payments. She was really falling behind and the debt was piling up. And it was just getting more toxic in that apartment. It was just getting more aggressive, more violent. And then Hurricane Sandy hit. And Sonia evacuated her apartment and she left Jameson there. And when she returned, Jameson had gone. and he never returned. And that is eventually how Sonia got him out of her apartment. However, it was too late. She had already failed too many payments on her mortgage and she lost her home. Again, Jameson has ruined somebody else's life, and unfortunately there are so many more victims to come. So the next victim is a woman called Melissa, and he just completely took over Melissa's home like he did with the last victims. And there are many more victims, like I can't believe it, there's so many more. And then we get to Jameson's final victim, a woman called Alex Miller. So Alex was a 31-year-old woman living in Philadelphia, and her roommate had just recently moved out and she needed another roommate to help pay the bills. But he didn't say that his name was Jameson Buckman. Oh no, he said that his name was Jed Creek. Seems like a great guy. He's a lawyer. He would be a respectable person. So Alex agrees for Jed to move in. And just like every other victim, this would be a decision that she regrets. Already, Jameson was an absolute nightmare. He did seem to become a nightmare quicker for Alex. And again, he used the same tactic of if there was anything wrong with the apartment in any kind of way, that would be his excuse to not pay rent. So Alex's mom, bless her, goes away, starts Googling, starts putting on her detective hat, trying to figure out who the hell this man is. And this is when she finds out that Jed Creek is not actually Jed Creek. This man is Jameson Buckman, and they find articles about him online that he is a serial squatter. So she decided to throw a party, which I know sounds bizarre, but honestly, this was genius. And she called the party, quote, a send-off for the serial squatter Jameson Buckman party. So on May the 1st, 2017, this party went down. So the music was blaring, everyone was drinking whiskey, and everyone at the party knew what was going on, and everyone was in on it trying to drive Jameson out. And eventually he got so annoyed he stormed out of his bedroom and left the apartment. And Alex and her friends, as soon as he left the apartment, they took a screwdriver and they removed his door handle. Again, genius. So the day after the party, Alex was up early. It was 4:30 a.m. and this is when he took out his revenge. Alex went into the bathroom to get ready for the day, and Jameson followed, and he put his hands around her throat and just started choking her. And he said, quote, "You made a grave mistake, you stupid girl. Who the hell do you think you are? You're in my home." And that is exactly what she said to him. But when Alex did this, Jameson, again, didn't take too kindly to this, and he lunged at her. And because she was standing in the doorway, he slammed the door shut, but her leg got caught in the door. He then kept repeatedly slamming the door on her leg at least 10 times. Oh my god, the pain. And luckily she managed to get to her bedroom and lock herself in. She called out the police, and the police arrived straight away, and Alex informed them of what happened, and Jameson Buckman was finally arrested. He was charged with aggravated assault, and he would never go back to Alex's apartment again. So Jameson is now in jail, and I wish I could say that he stayed there, but he doesn't. When Jameson is in jail, he calls his brother, his older brother Harry, to come and bail him out. Jameson asks if he can crash at Harry's house. However, Harry knows that his younger brother can be quite aggressive and violent, and Harry has his own family to think about, so he refuses to let his brother stay with him. He started beating his brother with his own hands. Tragically, by the end of the attack, Harry had suffered so much blunt force trauma to the head that Harry had lost his life. Finally, thankfully, they detained him and arrested him. Following the arrest, Jameson was taken into custody and he was charged with the murder of his brother, Harry. However, Jameson would never make it to the trial because whilst he was in jail awaiting trial, on the 8th of December 2017, Jameson Buckman had hung himself in his cell and taken his own life. How many lives these serial squatters, not just Jameson, how many lives these serial squatters destroy? And Jameson wasn't your typical serial squatter, because most serial squatters, their goal is to get free accommodation. But Jameson, his goal didn't really seem to be free accommodation. His goal was to terrorize people, to destroy people. And that is the end of the case of Jameson Bachman. And I still cannot believe how insane that case is. I don't think I've ever come across a case quite like this.